There are 4 teams left in the FA Cup. The semi-finals will happen at the end of April. We are going to discuss who is going to win the FA Cup. Luke Moore, we've got Forest versus Manchester City, and we've got Aston Villa versus Crystal Palace in those 2 semi-finals at the end of April. Mouth-watering ties, of course. And there's 3 teams in there who, let's be fair, haven't won the competition for a long time, or in the case of Palace, haven't won the competition ever, whereas Man City are serial winners. So let's start with Manchester City against Nottingham Forest. It's in terms of their league positions, Forest could be argued as the favourites. But in terms of recent silverware, you would think it would be Manchester City. Who do you think are the favourites for that game?
It's funny, isn't it? Because it seems completely ridiculous to suggest that Nottingham Forest would be favourites for this semi-final. They are higher in the league. They are having a better season. But as you said, Manchester City are in their 7th semi-final in the FA Cup in a row and have an incredible record in this competition. Look, to me, I mean, you said this at the start of the video, the end of April is when the semi-finals take place. The timing here is really interesting and it's really important. And the reason for that is it does depend massively on who's got what to play for, what position they are in the league in a month's time. Because if Nottingham Forest are on the brink of doing something historic and they really need to solidify their top 4 position, I know it could be a top 5, but let's say a top 4 position, then they need to decide what's really important to them. They need to decide what is going to be the thing that's going to etch them in that country, not quite that country, that club's history.
Forest country.
Yeah, and if it's an FA Cup win, then understandable, you know. If it's a top 4 place, then I mean that could be absolutely seismic for them and for their future too. So it really will be interesting to see how they can how they set up and what they kind of deem to be their priority. I mean, I'll put it back over to you because another thing to think about as well is just the idea that some would say that Manchester City have had an historically bad season under Guardiola, which they have, and the last thing they've got to grasp hold of is the FA Cup because they can look back and say, okay, it didn't go as we planned. It looks like it might be the end of a cycle, but we still won the FA Cup. There's also the element to that where you think really on their day with the personnel they've got, the depth they've got, City could have enough to get past Forest anyway, especially when thrown into the mix that the City are used to this type of occasion and Nottingham Forest aren't. So a lot of things to consider.
Yeah, I was impressed with the way Man City bounced back against Bournemouth, especially with O'Reilly coming on the pitch. Just another player that they have.
Looked fantastic.
And that's the thing with Man City, right? They are having a bad season, we know that, and I've said many times on the Football Ramble podcast and maybe even in this little studio we have now, that under Guardiola, Manchester City are not going to dine at the very, very top in English football again. I don't see that. But that doesn't mean to say that their players are suddenly terrible and the manager doesn't know what he's doing. I just think that absolute peak of running away with Premier League titles or indeed getting the better of other top Premier League sides, whether it be going to the last day, I think those days are probably over for Guardiola.
But you could still win the FA Cup and not be at that very, very highest level.
Exactly, and Guardiola said that this won't make amends for the bad season. Well, of course it won't, because winning the FA Cup's not as good as winning the Premier League. But my goodness, you saw him and his body language on the side, on the touchlines at Bournemouth. They want it and they want it bad. The players they have are very, very good players who can turn a game like that. Erling Haaland, yes, he missed a penalty and he missed a few chances. He's still one of the best strikers in the world. So on paper, they are a superior side to Nottingham Forest. And also, what you said about Forest, they've got top 4 to play for, or top 5. So do Manchester City. Manchester City have been there and done it with regards to FA Cup victories and getting into Champions League regularly. So the experience massively weighs in favour to Manchester City.
Yeah.
And I think Guardiola, now that they've made it to the big stage, he'll say to his players, because he may well leave in the summer. I know he's contracted to a year, next season as well. But he could make an argument for the likes of De Bruyne and Bernardo Silva, who could be let go in the summer. One last hurrah here, lads. And it's for these reasons why I think Manchester City will beat Forest. I'd rather, as a neutral, see Forest win because the romance of the cup, and it'd be a bit boring if Man City win the FA Cup again for the neutral, I think. But it's for those reasons I think Man City will just have enough. And it depends on who Nuno selects, because if he doesn't put Elanga in there and Hudson-Odoi, which he didn't do against Brighton, and I understand those decisions, if he sticks with those who have been tried and tested in the Cup, unless it goes to penalties, because they do love a penalty shootout in this year's competition, I think Man City will edge this.
Yeah, I think there's a boring inevitability about Man City just kind of flipping the narrative again and being able to say, you know what, we've had a bad season, but this trophy that 95% of clubs would die to win, we win it as a matter of course. You know, it's a big stain on their on Guardiola that they've managed to lose a final to Ten Hag's Man United, really.
Well, they want to make amends for that, definitely.
Yeah, and I get what you mean. I think very, very quickly on the Forest personnel selection thing, you've got to treat it as a horse for a course. The reason that he rested players is because they at the time they had a really important Premier League game pretty much straight after. So you can't play every player all the time. You have to prioritise here and there, which could come into play again come semi-final time. But I agree with you. I think ultimately, City do it. I can see City in another final. I can just see it happening. And it's no shame on Forest. Your potential top four finish in the semi-final of the FA Cup's no mean feat. Good on them. But I think Man City will just have enough.
Indeed, yeah. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel, everybody. Now, the other semi-final, Aston Villa versus Crystal Palace. Or Palace are at home, technically, aren't
they?
I think this one's tougher to call.
And you said that at the start, and I thought to myself, that's an interesting point, because you listed it as Aston Villa versus Crystal Palace.
Well, I just reeled it off.
And it's actually Crystal Palace versus Aston Villa, which is important.
It is important.
In the context of this semi-final.
Crystal Palace love an away dressing room.
They do love an away dressing room. They love playing away from home. Regardless of the lineup of the teams on paper, this will be an away game of sorts for them anyway.
So your point doesn't stand then?
It kind of half stands.
Right, okay. Well, how much are you going to stand on that point? Because who do you think is going to win the game?
Well, it's a really, really evenly matched tie, isn't it? Again, what position are Aston Villa going to be in come the end of April? Are they still going to be in the Champions League?
Well,
are they going to be fighting to get that top four position again? The answer to that question could be, both those questions could be yes. Could be yes and no. Could be no and yes. Right? So we don't know. And then,
but your ultimate answer is you don't know.
No, we don't know in terms of the obviously I can't predict what's going to happen in a month's time in terms of where teams are going to be at. I think Villa have been they've looked really good the last few weeks. I think their additions in January have settled in. They've done really well, and it could make a difference for them. But I do think that the way Crystal Palace played against Fulham in the quarter-final was, one of the best away performances of the season.
It was impressive.
It was really good. They took them apart. They played to their strengths. They knew exactly what they were doing. They won 3-0 and it could have been more. Against a team who have picked their moments this season but are very capable. And that it wasn't really a competition. It wasn't really a debate. So if Palace can take that kind of performance while being firmly ensconced in mid-table and not really worrying about the Premier League at that point, they can absolutely get past Villa. But this one will come down, I think, more to the ability to manage the occasion, because for both those teams, it's not as uneven as the other semi-final. Man City have been there, done it a million times. That possibly will make a difference against Forest. Palace versus Villa, both those teams would bite your hand off to win the FA Cup. Palace have never won it. Villa haven't won it for ages.
Both have been to the final fairly recently.
It's who manages that that occasion. Villa were humbled, right, in the final
against Arsenal. Yeah. They also had a League Cup final against Man City where they gave a better account of themselves. But I think with
But what do you think of what I've said there then?
Yeah, I think the elephant in the room is whether Villa beat Paris Saint-Germain or not. I don't think they will, because we've seen PSG in the Champions League in the latter stages. They've been brilliant. If they were to win that, the semi-final of the Champions League is around the same time as the semi-final of the FA Cup. And if you're in a semi-final of a Champions League, I understand it would probably be against Real Madrid potentially, or whoever, or maybe Arsenal, to give Arsenal fans a little bit of a shout there. I think it depends on that, because you're into what do we prioritise now?
Yeah.
Because they'll still be going for top 4/5. There's a lot of important football to be played. If they go out to PSG, I think Emery can go, right, we've had a great run in the Champions League. Unless they get absolutely humiliated. But I think you could say we've had a great time in the Champions League. But now there's a chance for silverware here. And I think they have better players than Palace, generally speaking. When I say generally speaking, I mean, on balance in the squad, It's
funny you say that, because I know what you're going to ask me, and I'm actually leaning towards Crystal Palace.
Oh yeah.
I think that if they can execute a game plan I think they've got every chance because of the aforementioned reasons.
This is Palace's season.
Yeah.
Palace could, the way they're playing, they could play themselves into European football contention. It would take an incredible run for them to do it. They could do it, but it would take an incredible run, and it could, and the way they're winning games, that is possible. However, you win the FA Cup, you got European football, and I think that Palace will have razor sharp focus.
Yeah, I agree, and I think that's the difference. I guess you can't really point to the managers in this game though, because Emery's record in cup competition is brilliant. Glasner's done it as well with Eintracht Frankfurt. So they've both got pedigree winning cups. To me, I think on the day, just because of the priority situation, I think Palace do it.
So Palace Man City final, you're thinking?
Yeah.
And it's
going to be a short portion of the video, isn't it? This bit.
I think Palace are going to beat them.
Do you? No, you don't.
Come on.
For me, I think it comes down to this boring inevitability that Man City will win the FA Cup this season. I think they'll beat Crystal Palace in the final. I think they'll beat them in to be honest, probably quite a boring way as well. I think we'll find the individual players that we get so excited about from Palace, and Eze, for example, will be blunted. To me, I think it's a Man City, if not comprehensive, fairly comfortable win in the final against Palace.
Who said the romance of the cup was dead? This guy.